Okay, we're live.
Good evening, once again. And welcome to Mahone Bay Town Council. The final meeting for the month of June. And we will begin by acknowledging that we are gathered tonight in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Tonight, we gather with the intent followed by the living of peace and friendship treaties. We do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. Welcome to those of you at home who have joined us on YouTube. Just to remind you that when the agenda is completed, before we go into the closed session that is on the agenda, we will provide you folks at home who may be watching with an opportunity to comment or question on any topic that is addressed in tonight's meeting. We'll call that meeting to order. Council, you have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your wish?
Move that the agenda be accepted as submitted.
Thank you. Seconded by Councilor Feeney. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Let's go to the minutes of the regular council meeting of June 13th, 2023.
Mayor, with regard to item 5.3, I think there's a general consensus from staff and from the council at large that we can deal with that matter this evening. And instead of passing this along to the PAC, which I believe we're not having a meeting for at least another month, I do think this is housekeeping. I think with the recommendation from the CAO, then I'd move that council accept the request to discharge the development agreement from 350 Main Street, Mahone Bay.
Okay.
No, we're starting.
We would normally call for a seconder, but I think if we can just table that motion until we get through this. And when we get into the business of the evening.
We're in correspondence?
No,
Regular meeting.
we still haven't.
This is the minutes of the previous.
My
meeting.
apologies, Mayor. I thought we were through that item. So fair enough.
Good
I'm
point.
happy to defer the motion. That's right. I'll take my cues from Councilor Carver's commentary last meeting.
That is something we'd like to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a second here? Councilor Wilson seconds. On the motion, in the question. All in favor? All in favor? The motion is carried. Public input session. This is a 15-minute period where people have an opportunity to comment. And discuss with council an issue that concerns them. Do we have any plan? No?
No,
Well, we should wait for a few minutes to see if any occur.
Well, yeah, we're not obligated to wait, we could wait a minute or two.
Just a minute.
yeah, I guess if somebody's typing on, yeah.
But you need to be in the room to avail yourself of the opportunity.
Yeah, this is not like the one at the end of the meeting. Where nobody's about to come in. Here, street.
You don't need to wait.
Takes longer to tell you what we're gonna do than it does to do it. Okay. Let's move on to item number 4. There are no presentations on the agenda. Let's go to correspondence. 5.1 is a proclamation request.
We don't do.
We have a policy on proclamation requests.
Our policy is that we don't make proclamations, if we don't know, and I was interested in this particular one, there was no identification as to who had written the letter. I just thought it was a kind of a strange request, yeah.
Okay. So there's no further action for that one. 5.2, priority access to public housing. The Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency. Information.
Um,
Councilor Curley.
well, I had wondered what they were looking for in, sending this letter to us. It was very vague in terms of what they were looking for. And I wondered whether they might get better information from the South Shore Open Door Soda, Association Soda. And whether we in fact would reply with that kind of suggestion.
Would they not be in discussion with?
I don't know. I just found this a very vague letter. I really didn't understand what they were hoping that we could do.
Kind of in keeping with the rest of the housing discussion. CIO.
So I can add some light to this, whether you want to make a response suggestion or speak to any of the other organizations, is certainly council prerogative, but the letter was to inform me that they'd be reaching out to me, and they did that. There was a session for CAOs earlier this week, and this is a bit arcane for anyone viewing, but essentially there are ways you get on the waiting list for public housing. And one of the ways is living in inadequate housing, which poses an immediate health or safety risk. And the process defined in the current legislation to assess that relies on municipal staff, which is essentially not a process that is regularly utilized. So the Auditor General, I guess, has found that this is not necessarily being applied. And they wanted to talk to municipalities about how we would feel about this sort of cross jurisdictional notion of municipal staff being the ones to put people on the wait list based on this criteria. And in the session I attended, it was one of two, I don't think we felt very good about it, honestly. And I did raise that there's a lot of interplay between this and the tenancy board and minimum standards. Ultimately, whether you're, what the parental perspective was, the first thing you should be looking to do is address issues with your existing housing. That the waiting list for public housing is not the quickest or best solution, which I think we all know. So, there is a value in connecting the two things in the sense that if a municipality has a minimum standard regime, and if the building inspection department is responsible to evaluate whether those minimum standards be met, that evaluation is essentially the same scope of work that is envisioned on addressing the adequacy of housing that could be put on a wait list. So theoretically, you would get into a situation where you could have a single call, it would trigger an assessment, would originally begin with trying to address the issues, but it would also put you onto a wait list. But to get any of that would require a much greater municipal role. So everyone's concerned about the province assuming that, especially as a reaction to criticism from the Auditor General, as opposed to part of a comprehensive housing strategy. So yeah, that's my perspective on it anyway. I don't think municipalities are eager to be in the driver's seat on this, but I'm also not sure that the province would even be talking about it if it hadn't been called out and it was.
Okay.
So that's all by way of suggesting that it's received and filed.
I mean, I think, unless we do want to do anything value add, I mean, this was to inform you to talk to me, to didn't talk to me, or I feel like we've got a perspective from the idea.
Okay, thank you. 5.3. Councilor Fee.
Mary heard the previous commentary. I won't revisit it, but I would again move the council approve the request to discharge the development agreement from 350 Main Street.
Okay, do we have a second? Councilor Wilson seconds. On the question. Oh. All in favor? Motion's carried. And finally, Minister Rohr has requested a list of municipally owned vacant land, which I believe is a relatively short list.
Yeah, and I can comment a little bit. I mean, I'm surprised that they're going through this step when they've already reached out many times over the past year, and I'm sure all the CAOs like myself have given this informal response as to what lands we have. If there were any that were choice for this purpose, they would have jumped on them already, and we would be in a conversation with them. So we could inform them that we have a couple of pieces of land that they've already contemplated at the staff level and found not meet the criteria that they're looking for. I'm not sure how valuable it is, but I just wanted to note that, like, it is surprising they're asking for this list when they definitely already asked at the staff level many times about properties meeting these criteria.
Councilor Wilson.
On this list, will we include land that we own that's outside the town?
I've never mentioned any land that we own that's outside the town, but
The criteria is service, lane, isn't it?
yeah, in the service.
Oh, it's.
Service lane, yeah. That was what my thought was too, Kelly. I mean, if you want 18 acres by X of 10. We got you covered.
So there is no further action at this point?
Well, I mean, we can let them know we have two properties that are vacant and proximate to servicing, but they've assessed them previously and not found them to be what they were looking for, so I guess it. And that would be the public works yard property on Kinburn, which is not actually vacant, we are using it for operation. And the portion of the property that includes the sports field, which other than the sports field remains designated residential land. So those are two properties, but they both have a lot of challenges. I actually think that in order to get them to a point where development would be possible, enough work would be done that you probably would, and we will talk about, because it's already been necessary, we would probably looking at those lands as part of the housing action plan. And there would be significant costs incurred towards developing them, which would be something that CMHC could possibly support. So if we were serious about it, they're not really the kind of low-hanging fruit that the province is looking for. But potentially there are residential development solutions to those properties, but would require a lot more work. Like when they contacted me last, they were looking for properties where construction could begin within 3 months, which was, I mean, none of our properties.
There's no such thing.
Yeah.
If there was, construction would have begun.
Yeah.
So
Councilor Murray.
how does that work? Organization, like, how does that work? That the province is asking the municipality about lands that they might have available that potentially could be developed for housing. So is the province telling us to do it? Is the province saying, we have a project we're gonna put on your land? I don't understand the process. And I'm feeling a little bit happy about it because they haven't yet sent out their housing needs assessment. Or, so how does that work? Organization there, and in terms of the.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't said what their intention is to do with this list. But, it may come back to previous conversations we've had about them imposing ministerial authority with respect to the development of those properties. So that there may be some of that in the background, not that that's specifically raised.
Councilor Lawrence Croft, you had a comment or question?
Yes, I think an answer to what Penny was, Councilor Carver was speaking to. I think they're looking for ways of partnering with municipalities in helping us solve some of our housing plans or projects that we may like to undertake. But when I was at the conference, well, you were there too, Mayor. I had several conversations and they seem to be quite well aware of land that we already had in Mahone Bay. So I think they've been doing a little scan themselves.
Well,
It's
one's
coming
being
through
used
this
for the soccer field now, so that's not going to, it doesn't meet the criteria.
Maybe a bit of a problem.
I'm a bit of a problem at this point.
It does provoke the question, and there's a little bit of a tangent on this, but about subdivision of that piece of property, because it is something that we've talked a lot about, we haven't done. And if we do need to ever look at that other piece, we probably should proceed with it.
Just to clarify, Dylan, on that point, because I know it did come up at the community meeting on Monday evening, and we were talking about the land use bylaw evolution above, so that is zone residential, that's residential in behind the sock, and well, colloquially, we're calling the new soccer field, which is going to be rezoned. And I guess, Mr. Haston mentioned, is that area going to be developed or protected? So, I think our intent right now is, like, we haven't declared other than to remain, to remain available for residential development under the right criteria, the right opportunity, that's the plan.
It's certainly the status, we have had another, shouldn't be directing us. There is something to consider that it's not an absolute binary either. It's a
No,
very
fair.
nice piece of property.
No, fair.
I would hate for people to think that it had to be 100%
Yeah.
developed or 100% protected.
I just think that we should be clear what the default status quo is. Because I think there's some expectation that property could fall within a protected mandate as well. So I think I'm okay with the status quo, the way it is now, and the current plan. I'm not trying to suggest we should do anything other than exactly what was proposed on Monday evening. But I guess the point is, Dylan, that property would notionally be identifiable under this criteria. It's not service, but it's.
Yeah, that's the thing, depending on the purposes of the request, I would be a little hesitant perhaps in letting them know formally without subdividing,
Mhm.
just to make it clear what portion of the property we're talking about.
I mean, we've got 7 acres of land on the other side of the railway tracks, on the other side of the solar garden towards Lunenburg but it's landlocked. There's no way to get to it. I mean, there's not a bunch of obvious answers.
So I'm just wondering if, does the CAO need direction to respond to Minister Lord? Or what do we do with this item? Receive and file or give direction to the CAO?
Well, I'm under the impression, CAO, that you feel you've already been an answer.
Yeah, absolutely,
The
but I mean,
question.
that doesn't necessarily preclude them asking in this format, so. Whether we don't write back, whether we write back and say, we're happy to work with you on projects and we understand their staff are in regular communication. Or whether we actually name properties, at which point there are some questions about whether we should even name those two. Until sub one is subdivided and until we deal with the question of the use of the other one for municipal purposes.
Was the George Anderson point the other night? We only have 3 square kilometers.
That's
And it's not like there's a plethora of development opportunities around on serviced land.
The tad left some one.
And the province is also well aware that there are privately owned lots in town that are much better meet the criteria for what they're looking for. And we know that they have reached out to the owners of those properties, so it's not as if they're not pursuing development on private property in town as well.
Perhaps a letter to Minister Lord expressing those sentiments, Mr. Hyde, would be appropriate if somebody wants to make the motion. Oh,
I'd be happy to make the motion. I knew exactly what it was.
it's just to respond to the letter stating that these are the properties we have and there have been discussions on them in the past and we're interested to participate in future projects with the provincial government on the housing nature.
So.
Well, yeah, I guess the only question was, is it going to refer specifically to properties? And I guess I was suggesting maybe it not.
Not the,
Just doesn't actually provide the PIDs.
other than the ones that you,
Well, I wouldn't necessarily even do that, but that's up to whoever's making the motion. Okay, but
okay,
I think we could write back and say, we have and continue to be open to discussing these properties. But I think it's not equivocal that any of them meet the definition that they're looking for.
I think. I'll make a motion that direct the CAO to reply to Minister Lohr, stating that at the moment. Stating that we have been in constant contact with his staff about this issue, and as they presumably know, none of the lands that the town own at this moment in time meet the criteria as stated, but there are possible opportunities in the future.
okay,
I'll second that.
okay, you heard the motion?
And Kelly, know you've been dealing with tech issues. Did you get the motion? Or are you good to go back and get it?
I'm good to go back and get it. I have it for the most part. I wouldn't want to read it out loud at the moment.
Okay, moved and seconded. On the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to staff reports. Mr. Hyde.
So as usual, staff report to council, it does include most of the information that would usually be in the second report of each month. It is still missing the budget information, just with my being on vacation there, we basically passed the budget and the package was published, so there was no time. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Dylan just had one question that came up on Monday evening from citizen about the timing of the sidewalk paint exercise. I know I'm not sure if that RFP or if that, if that's been let out to somebody to do the cleaning work, but I know in front of the three churches, in front of the teaser, the sidewalk is very faint. And I'm just wondering, do you think that's something that'll happen in July or later on in the summer?
I assume you mean the cross.
Sorry,
No,
pardon me. Crosswalks, yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan's report does actually reference that it is expected in July.
In July,
Yeah.
okay.
We're all sneezing.
I don't know.
Oh, my goodness.
Hopefully not literally contagious, but the.
Council Wilson.
My only question or comment really is that there's this item in here on the, in item 28, which refers to a town finance washer and dryer at the Marina Comfort Station, including blah, blah, blah. And as you all, I'm sure, recall, when Pete Conroy was here, he was very clear that when they asked about this washer dryer issue, they weren't asking for the town to fund it. If they wanted to fund it. And I'm wondering if we preempted them or are we just, what's the status?
Yeah, I had the same question because he said that, all they wanted was permission to be able to use that space for it. That's all they wanted.
Yeah, I mean, this motion was the result of a pretty substantial amount of talking at the budget meeting. And I think it was just, and I know the deputy mayor is one of the people commenting on it, I think it was more about putting in context the notion of public access and hours and rates and how people would get in to use it. And you're basically having a conversation and saying, if the Wooden Boat Society did it, this is what they would do. And then is there any way in which council would see that as not, adequate, in which case we could do something different, you know what I mean? So if everybody's just comfortable with what Keith has proposed, we don't have to do more work on it, but I do believe the deputy mayor is one of the people who was concerned that there may be some difference between the service offering that you would get with the boat society and so I'm not trying to speak for him, I just know he's not here.
Yeah, I think that we worked along that lines, but I think if the Wooden Boat Society is willing to put them in, that type of thing, they might eventually open it to the public and it'd be conducive to them to do so. If they're having coin operated machines that they want to get money back from, the more people that use it, the more beneficial it is going to be to them. I'm not sure what type of putting in, but I'm sure it's going to be a charge to the boaters and whoever's using them.
Yeah, I mean, if they only charge the boaters, they probably won't put a coin operated service in. They might make it part of what you're paying for as a user, because the coin operated machines are more costly.
Council Wilson.
My recollection of the timing of this, the cadence of this is quite different. As I recall, the discussion we had about who had access and if the town was paying for it, everybody would have to have access and yada, 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 was before we found out, or it was pointed out to us that we weren't being asked to pay for it in the first place. So would have been a very different conversation at budget if we had known at the time that we weren't on the hook for building the thing, for putting it in, I think.
So my recollection of the conversation was, I agree, the original idea, the original cadence of the conversation was that there was a request for funding. So I think that's a fair point, that there was no request for funding. I think as we discuss the situation though, we remember like the comfort station and that adjacent buildings, town property. It's not property that is owned by the Wooden Boat Society. But the request was to put the
wash machine in that building. And the general consensus, I thought, after the lengthy discussion was that if we were going to allow the use of the building, we wanted to make sure the public had access to the washing machine. Because otherwise it would suggest that there's a level of, you're excluding people from access to a public facility that's being used by people who don't even live here. And there was a general unease with that at the time.
And that's really irrespective of who's paying.
Yeah, so I mean, the discussion really wasn't about, we want to spend $5,000 on a laundry machine. The view was, we would be better off spending $5,000 on laundry machine and installing it in a town building, because it would guarantee community access beyond just the customer base coming from the marina. Because we already have a situation where we have no parking allowed on the wharf, no loitering on the wharf unless you're a boat owner, no fishing on the wharf. And now it would be, you can't use the washing machine that's in the town building on the wharf. That is not part of the lease per se. So I don't know, I would have preferred to go with the existing plan where the town funds the laundry machine. Everybody gets access to it and everybody's happy. We get cost recovery over the next couple of years and win-win.
So I mean, right now, we're gonna do that report unless there's a move to rescind that, I suppose. So we don't have to do anything, and that's what we'll do.
Well. I
Well, just hang on, Councilor Wilson. Councilor Carver, you were.
Well, yeah, so I'm just listening and wondering what is in the lease that might reference this particular situation as Councilor Keating has described it.
Well, it'll take me time to check on that, but I don't think that, as Councilor Feeney said, I don't think we're not leasing the washrooms. We have an arrangement with the Wooden Boat Society where they maintain the washrooms, but I'm not gonna go out on a limb and say that's in the lease necessarily, but I'll check.
Right, so, but even with that information, it makes it a complicated situation. And I'm sort of tending towards supporting Councillor Keating's take on it. And it is sort of part of an ongoing situation with the Wooden Boat Society where there's some ambiguities in terms of how the arrangement works.
Well, there were two other motions passed at the same time. One of them was to meet with the society, and the other one was to investigate a fishing pier, which was
Right.
entirely about that conflict of
Yeah.
you marina users versus the public.
Councilor Wilson.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea for the town to get in the laundry business.
Yeah.
I think if we have one washing machine down there and it's accessible to everybody in Lunenburg County effectively, it'd be far worse than having none,
I agree.
because it would just, the lineup would be down the street to.
I agree as well. But this was a policy discussion around the challenge that we were all facing with the town facility, the town assets being more only used by the exclusive benefit of the folks who use the marina. That was really the issue. Like I have noticed there's no burning ember under my feet to say we should spend $5,000 on the washing machine. It was a policy prescription to the challenge of us having a level of concern about the public perception of the benefit of the marina to the community versus just marina users.
Well, I agree that, we're going a whole new can of worms, but if we allow it, we still have the option of just saying, no, you can't put it in.
If you think about what the original intent or the request was from the Wooden Boat Society, it was to enable the people who arrive by boat and going to the liquor store and getting your laundry done are the two number one things on your list.
Yeah.
And if they have to get in a lineup with 20,000 other people in Lunenburg County to use one washer and one dryer really doesn't do anything to resolve the situation. And I would suggest that the reason why the Wooden Boat Society was willing to acquire and install and operate the washer and dryer was so that it wouldn't be perceived as being a town provided resource. And I think
Town building.
we're doing us and the Wooden Boat Society a disservice to talk in such negative perspectives around the fact that their insurance provider said people shouldn't be fishing down on the floats. Loitering at the wharf is no different than loitering up at the Mahone Bay Center, where they have signs that say no loitering. And the RCMP have been up there and enforced it at different times. I think the volunteer service that the Wooden Boat Society provides brings a lot of business into our community every summer, whether it's a boater or the people that like to watch the boats on the water. And we do them a disservice by constantly trying to detract from what they're doing down there. And the laundromat thing, it's not what they need. It's not that Mahone Bay needs a laundromat, or frankly, some entrepreneur would have put another one in. They just need a service there for the people, like the showers when they come in. Anyway, CAO.
Oh, I just, they did have time to check on the lease agreement to Council Carver's earlier question, so it doesn't mention anything about the arrangements with the society for maintenance and operation. It does specify that the town is responsible for the washrooms, their operating hours of maintenance, et cetera. And it grants permission for very, very specifically defined storage of materials by the society in the building. As the only sort of anything granted to the society with respect to the washrooms. So obviously the agreement on maintenance is a side agreement, is not part of the lease.
Yeah, the taxpayers of the town pay the $50,000 annual budget for the comfort stations. The taxpayers of the town pay for the water. The taxpayers of the town pay for the electricity.
No, they don't. Electricity's metered.
Excellent. Well, that's an improvement. And to the degree that the society supports 14 people that live in town, that's terrific. But the vast
Most of
majority,
them.
the vast majority of the 90% of the people who have moorings don't live in town, according to the Wooden Boat Festival Society, and people are concerned about it. And people are concerned about the escalating levels of exclusivity and the difficult challenges of having access to public spaces in that area.
Yeah.
And so the public's debating it. And so we can hey, listen, we can let it run. We'll see what happens. If I'm a little worried about the trend.
And I also would say, I wouldn't presuppose that this report, if it was prepared according to the motion, would like recommend the town operating a washer and dryer.
Yeah.
Like the report doesn't speak to whether it would be something that would be recommended or feasible or cost recovery, or it just says to prepare a report. And again, I'm happy to be directed not to prepare a report. It's obviously one less thing for us to do. But I didn't want anyone to presume that anyone was riding for a laundromat. I don't think anyone was. I think this motion was intended to investigate it so the council could put the conversation behind us one way or another.
Councilor Kerr.
So just two thoughts. One is there, because it would be a facility that benefits the Wooden Boat Society in a town-owned facility, which is incurring costs to the town. Would there be any mileage or possibility of asking them to pay rent on that, or some increased rent for the use of the space in the facility? And then my second question is, if we're metering the electricity, are we metering the water use? Because the water use is going to,
I don't
go up.
So we do meter both services to them. they're not responsible for services to the utility, to the building. to
But
the water.
they're paying those.
They're paying their
the
water and their electric bills.
Right.
They're not paying those bills with respect to the
To
water.
pump stations.
Not the washers, they don't pay for anything of the washers.
I don't
Or
believe
water.
either. I have double check on power. I know the water for the
Yeah.
washrooms is not there.
So that makes a big difference too, if we're paying for the power and
The
water.
operating costs for the marina are paid by the Wooden Boats Society.
But
Now, some of the structural pieces, like the work that needs to be done to maintain the town's wharf,
We
period.
spent $80,000 down in the last 2 years.
Yeah,
$25,000 last year for a study.
yeah,
We got $65,000 budget for the washrooms to get repaired. Got a $3 million budget for the wharf in front of us. I
but
mean,
the
paying-
operational costs,
yeah, the $69,000 to run the marina for the hundreds of people who don't live here, fair enough. I mean, that's true, they handle that.
I'm just a little. I'm a bit concerned about this notion of, you know, the town's paying whatever it is, several $1,000s for the 2 washrooms. But remember who uses the washrooms, like I do not typically, if I need to go to the bathroom, run down Edgewater Street to the public washroom. Those washrooms are all used by visitors.
Mhm.
And some of them come by boat, and some of them come by car,
and
and many of them come by
And we're
bicycle.
happy to do
And
that.
we're happy to do it. So what's the issue?
No,
And, you know, people, the boaters use the showers. I don't go down there for a shower.
and they pay. when they
It's
use
pretty
it.
exclusive. And I don't see any difference between that and a laundromat.
I agree totally. The only issue, and I guess this is the crux of the issue, is that you have to have a trust that somebody who goes down and uses the washroom or uses the shower or uses the laundry facilities is not going to be told they're not allowed to because they're not a member of the Marina Association. They're not a paying mooring owner.
They,
And that's the concern.
anyone can go down there and have a shower and pay the, whatever the fee is, the $3 for the shower. Right? Campers, people in the motorhomes.
And that's what we're trying to achieve through the discussion around the laundromat to ensure that can happen for the public at large. And that it will not be, they would not be excluded from doing so. That's really all this we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that if I can, that's where the report would comment on the idea that if the boat society did it at their expense, how would they operate it? So
Yeah.
would they put in a coin operating machine that'd be a lot more expensive and operate it on a cost recovery basis? And would people have access to that? Would they operate it when they were open only and a staff person would take $2 and, you know, you'd use a regular washer dryer that you'd have at home? How they would control access? What if a boater wanted to use it after hours? Would they have a key? All of those things are the kind of questions that I haven't had the opportunity to
Mhm.
discuss.
You know,
As it says here in the report, if we haven't done it yet, but I think it won't take long to do, yeah.
I think it'd be beneficial to proceed with the report, so we can find out. these
Mhm.
things.
agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
This is where we started.
Yeah, exactly.
But thank you for the comprehensive answer to my question.
Okay.
Your worship, I have another question about the report. It's in the water section and it's.
Ah. Send an editorial.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Is there a problem? with
No,
that?
no, not at all.
Just the
No,
last
no.
question took 20 minutes, that's all.
Oh.
And we ended up right back.
Well, we don't have to spend 20 minutes on it. We can,
Okay.
if we want to talk some more. It's on page 13 of page 32. And it is, I think, the last bullet on the page. And it says residential auto flusher installed in problem area. 1 week of operation with positive results. And I'm really curious. What is it?
So the auto flushing units are what we try to use to avoid a constant bleed on a dead end line. So a lot of the time you get water quality issues at the end of the dead end line.
Right.
We've traditionally bled those lines on an ongoing basis. It's orders of magnitude more water lost. The auto flusher unit just calibrates how often it needs to keep the water moving and it doesn't run nearly as much. So we're putting them at dead ends. Usually they're a dead end that is outside. But in this case, it's a dead end that's in a residence.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. So we had to put it in the residence.
Oh, I didn't know we had such a thing, huh?
It's possible that this, well, I think likely, would
Okay,
have been precluded by ICIP project priority one that didn't get funded, because this is the area that this is in. But since it didn't get funded, this is a workable solution whereby the property owner, I think it's now been a couple of weeks since Scott put this in, commented that he will tell us if there's any issue, but right now he's happy with the service, so it's a place where we've had endemic issues.
Just a further question on that then. This is in a residence. How does the auto flusher flush the system?
Yeah. So that's getting too specific to the basement and the drainage and, but Scott has it set up. You can talk to him outside of it. If you're really interested, I'm sure he could tell you that's how it is, yeah. Gotta go somewhere, right?
Yes, sir.
While we're on the topic of water, I just noticed that in Q4, our losses are about 4 million liters higher than they were in Q3. Well, our sold is $2 million less, 2 million liters less. So our usage is going down, but our losses are going up. And I wonder why.
So I think the best answer to that is that Scott and I today met and talked extensively about water loss, and he's working on a report that will be presented hopefully to the July 27th meeting, so that it's not just a footnote here in the statistics, because they've actually had a lot of success in finding and shutting down leaks this last little while. And he can quantify some of that, which I think will be good to talk about. But yeah, I think we should save that analysis for the upcoming report.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else in that report?
Just a quick question. Looking back on the flushing thing, it says the second unit would be located to be next, it'd be, okay, could be either Edgewater Street or Fairmont. So I say there's no way it could be on the corner of.
No, it must
So it'd be either one or the other.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we're
Just
still,
all, yeah.
like Fairmont is a dead end line, Edgewater Street's a dead end line, yeah. And actually, I think he's looking at, we were just talking about there's like a temporary portable auto flush unit that could be a good way of diagnosing areas where it could result in improved performance or decreased loss before we bite the bullet and put in a permanent unit in those locations. So just something you'd set up for like a couple of weeks and monitor. But yeah, it seems like a lot of the extremities of the system, you know, traditionally we've had service quality issues at those locations. So if you combine that with the water loss, there's some good rationale for trying to deal with it. Again, you kind of get to that point when you actually have some staff and they've been here long enough, they can start to try to tackle these problems. So I'm really happy that Scott and Blake are being able to do that. I know they could use another employee within that division, but at least having two of them have their feet under them is certainly making a difference.
Sorry, but I go to, I was going to move to the acceptance of the report, unless there are any other questions. Seconded.
Okay, moved and seconded to receive the report for information purposes.
Please.
Okay, on the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the noise bylaw.
Thank you,
Still
Mr.
making
Mayor.
noise around that.
So we did have a pretty lengthy conversation policy and strategy meeting last month. And staff tried to capture everything we could from that conversation. What you'll see here is a very extensively revised version. Basically a very extensively shortened version, I guess, in a lot of ways, because we talked about switching to the decibel reading basis. And when you start to do that, it becomes unnecessary to make that many specifications about the type of noise unless we're looking at excluding certain types of noise, so creating exemptions to the decibel reading. So that would be the area council may wish to consider. One thing I did want to note though, because it wasn't really something we talked a lot about, I know council's emphasis was on quiet hours and specifically the kind of after hours. But on review of other decibel levels and other bylaws around Nova Scotia, it's pretty much entirely consistent that there is a daytime hours and a nighttime hours, and that those be at the levels in this draft. So if anyone's wondering, that's where we got that. And I'm just gonna have to go grab some water, apologies. Okay. Sure, what the coffee is in tonight,
Anyone have any comments on the amended noise bylaw?
I think I'd prefer we wait until the CAO comes back, just so we can be sure we get information that
He's
will
back.
help us understand. He's back. Okay.
Alive.
So, yeah, I mean, it's presented here for council's consideration with those changes, but obviously we had so many things that we discussed that there may still be revisions. My only comment would be that if you're good with this version, we could go to second reading, but otherwise, if you wanted to go second reading, you'd have to name the amendments that you wanted to make to the draft in your motion. Or we'd be directed to bring an amended version back,
Mhm.
it just puts it out for another meeting. And I'm certainly not trying to push for getting it adopted, I just knew council had requested it be delivered by this meeting.
Mayor, I think this is a vastly improved first draft, second draft, I guess, but I think it'd be wise to move this along to first reading as presented. And I guess happy to make a motion to that effect.
Okay. We have a seconder, Councillor Wilson. On the question.
Well, I'm sorry that it's gone to motion, so before we have more discussion, but there it is. I'll take advantage of this discussion period. I think when we had discussed it at the Policy and Strategy Committee, I had really imagined that an individual could use their own personal, because we talked about the idea that you could have your own decibel counter on your own personal cell phone. Because we had talked about that. That was an image that was present in the room with us when we were talking about the policy and strategy. So what's different here is that the definition is an approved sound meter means an instrument to measure levels of sound pressure being administered by an approved town employee. That means if I have a complaint about a sound that is happening outside of the time, outside of the conditions that are listed here, I would have to somehow arrange to get an approved town employee to come and take the decibel count. And that doesn't just, it seems to me not workable.
I mean, that is exactly what it means, but that is certainly the perspective I put forward at the time. You can't, I mean, anybody with a decibel meter could take a reading of anything, but it's no different from them just telling us they were offended, which was council's whole problem in the previous meeting. Because we weren't there, nobody knows what the reading was, you can scream into your own decibel meter, it's not, I mean, what would that, it's just testimony, which at that point then is what we originally based the bylaw on.
So even as was suggested, of taking a screenshot of your decibel reading at the time with a timestamp on it and everything else, we don't know what the sound is, that's causing.
But I mean, it just becomes testimony at that point.
Yeah.
But I think the value, I guess, in having that transparency is that if someone is hearing a noise and considering whether to call for bylaw enforcement, they could use a decibel meter to read the level. Like that's, maybe you're annoyed by something and you read it and you say, oh, that's only 35. Well, no problem, no bother calling Allied then, eh?
Okay. Get over it.
Yeah.
Right, so I've had that impression when we talked about it the first time around, so this an error of a different reality. Another question I had was about electric tools being exempted. And the idea being that it's a way of encouraging people to get off carbon emitting machines.
Internal combustion.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just kind of flipped it from, instead of it saying like a non-combustion tools or trying to find a way to define
Yeah.
small handheld tools. And then the question was, well, would an electric tool that is larger, but it's still not combustion, you gotta draw a line somewhere, so yeah, that's.
Right, okay, so what, one is the carbon emissions issue, but the other is the noise, that's the
I
assumption.
think the carbon emissions is just a happy coincidence in that sense, in terms of.
That's the happy coincidence, but the assumption is that electric tools are quieter than, but when I read this, I think, well, what's to stop somebody from using a leaf blower, a battery operated leaf blower, which are very noisy, at midnight?
Hmm.
There's nothing to, so
And
what,
we could always change it to sort of small hand tools, but it'll always be a definitional issue.
That's Councillor Nana's comment.
Yeah.
On Councillor Rose.
I used to comment on that, because you're not gonna get the noise from an electric battery operated leaf blower that you get from the others. I know what a chainsaw makes for noise. Now have a battery operated one. And I'll tell you, I doubt if my neighbors next door can hear it.
The electric one.
Yeah, the electric one, because it's that quiet.
Interesting.
so that's an argument for not having any time limits specified for electric tools.
Yeah, now, the need for an exemption, if in fact it is so quiet as that it doesn't exceed the decibel levels anyway, is questionable, but I guess it's not harmful to have that.
Okay, so the noisy leaf blowers that I hear are gasoline powered then.
So typically, yes.
So my main concern then is about the just efficacy of having an approved town employee called to come and assess the sound level.
Well, perhaps councillors can be approved town employees. You know, have a little vessel.
Have to make you all special.
Yeah,
constables.
Special constable process.
You have special status, you can go check, but you can't do anything about it.
We're not adding that, we're not adding that to Eric's, job description.
So, yeah, I mean, we always will be dependent on the ability to bring somebody out. I guess the good thing there is that it speaks to the ongoing nature of the sound. So like if the sound is coming from a fan or a noisy party, there probably is time to respond. If the noise were a vehicle going by, I mean, Al won't even come, I don't think. I think he'll say, I appreciate you letting me know. Maybe sometime there can be an opportunity to put up like kind of a sting with the RCMP, but we're not gonna rush out to the scene of the crime, as it were.
And is the RCMP included as an approved town employee? No, because they're not a town employee.
No, so maybe that is a little a friendly amendment, like we could easily just put in or law enforcement, like we could put that in there.
That's my friendly amendment. There's a motion.
I agree.
Yeah,
Because that's the kind of small amendment that you could make as part of second or first reading.
anyone disagree? Okay,
I get a gun.
Tack a rider on.
Because they're apt to be more, well, they're an extra option in terms of getting somebody on site sooner.
Kelly, did we lose Suzanne on purpose?
I was just saying, where's?
She's,
Oh, cheers.
She's there. Moving around.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure in case she had a comment before.
He was doing yoga.
No, I can't stay still for very long. I have to move around.
Well, given all that, I will support the motion.
Okay. Kelly, you want to read back the motion?
Testing me tonight. The council provide first reading to the draft noise bylaw as amended to add, and that's the part that I have to go back and look at the bylaw to add it in, but I have a note, so it'll say to add.
Law enforcement.
Yeah.
All right. Who made the motion? You did, and I think you seconded it. Okay, you heard the motion on the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. It goes to first reading. All right. What
Just in case
about,
anybody's listening to this one, we know that this means that the hearing would take place on July 27th.
If it went in the paper tomorrow, then. Well,
I think we've got.
it could make it to the
Proper
27th.
week, yeah,
Yeah,
And that second reading,
yeah.
that would be second reading.
would be the hearing, I was just talking about the hearing.
Hearing.
The second
And the
reading,
election.
depending on the hearing, but I just wanted to mention, because people may be wondering, well, where do I voice my comments about this?
Yes, fair enough.
That's when the hearing will be at 6:30 on the.
There will be information on Facebook and the website concerning it as well.
Okay. And now the report of the clerk on the alternative voting bylaw.
Okay, so public hearing was held on June 29th, 2023, to receive verbal and written submissions regarding the town of Mahone Bay draft amended alternative voting bylaw. 2 members of the public were in attendance via town's YouTube channel. No members of the public presented comments. No submissions were received prior to the hearing. No submissions were received at the hearing, and the hearing adjourned at 6:51 p.m.
Okay. What did you wish, council?
So just as a reminder, this is where second reading to the bylaw is appropriate.
Somebody wants to make the.
How do we make that motion?
Thank you, Councilor Wilson. And Councilor now will second it. The motion is that we will have second reading of the bylaw. On the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Now. We have no council items, committee reports, Climate and Environment Committee, the draft minutes are included in your package. Does anyone have any questions or comments about those minutes?
No, Mayor, it is impressive, that committee really seems to have a lot of energy. You know, big contingent of people at the meetings, and
Lots of people,
Lots of
lots of
people there.
subject matter experts.
Yeah. I mean, we must have,
The most attendance I think we've had in
yeah,
here.
no, we jumped right off the page, the attendance list, I was very impressed.
They're an impressive group, they really are.
It's great that that's going so well.
Okay,
It's nice to have to follow up with you about the state and visit.
all right. No questions, let's go to the Asset Management Committee draft minutes from the meeting of June 8th. Anyone have any questions or comments? Okay.
Just hold a second,
Councilor
I thought I
Carver?
did have a question when I wrote it, and I got 5 notes at home. It might have been about the cross committee topics.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if the CAO or chair of the committee could give us an example of where that might come up. I'm just sort of curious about how that came up.
It came up primarily around the notion of risk and assigning risk projects. And that notwithstanding asset management, many other topics actually, like the environment and the climate committee, become an overlay to the asset management piece. So when all of the asset management data is accumulated and the risk elements and the impact elements and the potential cost elements, and you consider what risks are out there, the work of the climate and the environment committee can bring the climate and environment factors to bear as an overlay to the asset management ones. Hence the notion of getting the different committees communicating, maybe even to the point of having an environment rep on asset management and an asset management rep on the environment committee.
And I think it really does extend, you know, because of the nature of asset management, we have assets in all these different areas. So when we have a committee like the cemetery committee, and we need an asset management plan for the cemetery.
No,
Well, that's an obvious joint conversation there for the two committees. And I think, asset management doesn't, I think if I can be fair to characterize, doesn't necessarily want to be like just in the back room.
Yeah,
They want to talk to the people who are talking about these subjects, but we haven't yet, the decision was that we would recommend to council if a joint meeting should be scheduled rather than the committee just sort of doing that. So at this point, we haven't identified something.
and a joint meeting would be an ongoing issue.
Mhm.
Because the environment in which we are existing is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And it's constantly affecting the assets, fire department assets, cemetery assets that we're trying to manage.
I think it's a really good idea. I mean, to reduce the silo effect. And introduce a kind of matrix model. I love that.
No? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Thank you.
So we would be planning to continue that discussion at our committee. And then hopefully, I would suggest by September, have some ideas about how we can introduce it and begin to work with other committees. Or invite them to work with us, as the case may. Okay? All right, that is the only two reports that we have. We have no new business. So that brings our agenda, a regularly scheduled agenda, to an end. There will be an in-camera session following this. But before we go in camera, how many folks do we have at home, Kelly?
We have
How many people playing the home game?
6.
6? Does anyone have a question?
There is a question. I am wondering why, as a citizen, I am not allowed to park at the marina to enjoy our harbor. Is this because of a lease agreement? Are we not as taxpayers paying for some upkeep?
The only limitation that I'm aware of that the Wooden Boat Society has ever put on parking at the marina was when there was no parking for the people to access their boats from. So they allocated one portion on the southwest side as parking for the 50 people that have moorings, and the rest of the wharf was open parking for anybody. So you can park your car on the wharf. There typically is no restriction. There are days when it becomes extremely chock-a-block down there, and they've just put all the members' boats, or the people who have a mooring rented, they're on one particular part of the wharf.
I don't want to overly complicate, but I'm just going to add one detail. So the signed parking that the mayor is talking about, obviously there's places unsigned where parking is permissible, but I wouldn't say anyone go park your vehicle at the wharf and assume you can leave it there as long-term parking. It's not signed parking, and it may be subject to having to remove a vehicle if a vehicle is left somewhere and the person's not on site and you're parked just anywhere. I'm just saying you can't just park anywhere at the wharf, so I wouldn't want people
The
doing
only place
that.
that might happen is if you block the fire department's access.
You can't
To
block
the
that.
other wharf.
Block the access, you can't block access for turning into the parking lot from the secondary entrance either.
No.
Occasionally people have.
So
I
with
think
those
we've decided now
exceptions,
saying no parking there, actually.
you can park at the wharf,
That's it for questions.
okay? All right. If there are no further questions, we'll thank the people at home for joining us again tonight. And we'll be back in early July, the second Tuesday of July, for our first meeting of the summer season. We don't have council meetings at all, do we?
No regular meeting.
No regular meetings.
Hopefully no special
Special
meeting
meeting.
either. I just can't promise that, but
No
I'm not
regular-
expecting any.
Okay. Okay. So thank you for joining us. And we'll we'll say goodnight to you. And then we'll go in camera.
Should a motion for that.
Yeah, Counselor Feeney just made it. And Counselor Wilson seconded it. All in favor?